This is a guest essay written by Dr. Ray, who writes the newsletter Dr. Truthfinder.
In the past year, I've heard several comments by people who consider themselves deeply profound, such as, those who support Israel are going to be on the wrong side of history. Or even worse, how ironic that people whose families went through the Holocaust are now creating another Holocaust in Gaza and Lebanon. They think they are being clever, insightful, and superior to we lunkheads, who believe that Israel has a right to defend itself, when actually they are being pompous and ignorant. The Gazan War is nothing like the Holocaust, and the comparison is disgusting. From 1933 to 1945, an event occurred that was so horrific, the unenlightened cannot conceive that it actually happened. An attempt was made to completely wipe a people off the face of the earth. It is a fact, just like the earth's not being flat is a fact. We have first-hand accounts of victims and perpetrators, physical evidence, and photos. It was meticulously planned and executed. The Holocaust. We all know what this refers to. Hitler's plan was to completely eradicate any trace of Jewish blood, and he's succeeding in murdering 6 million. He spread the idea that Jews were vermin, that destroying them was like exterminating cockroaches. In this, he was supported by the pseudoscientific movement of eugenics that was popular in Europe and the United States. Pseudoscientists believed that their own white European heritage, the epitome of superiority, was being poisoned by the intermingling of inferior genes of those with more melanin in their skin. Hitler didn't pull his ideas out of a vacuum. Prominent pseudoscientists in the United States, Britain, and Germany advanced the belief that Jews were inferior and should be removed from the gene pool. Who was at the top of the genetic hierarchy? The white European scientists, of course. Fake science was used to, quote-unquote, prove that Jews were inferior based on certain facial features and skull measurements. Histrionic books were being published that the inferior races were polluting the gene pool. The theory was that it would actually be a kindness to human existence to prevent inferiors from reproducing, either by sterilization or by actually exterminating them in death chambers. Yes, Hitler's idea of murdering Jews in gas chambers actually stemmed from the pseudoscience of upper-class, quote-unquote, experts in Britain. That's why the current nonsensical attempts to reframe Israeli Jews as being pampered white colonialists of the British is so egregious. Jews from the 19th and early 20th century would have been incredulous that they would one day be classified as privileged white people. The Nazis had considered them an intermix of every inferior, non-white race, combined to produce Jewish demons bent on destroying, quote-unquote, pure Aryan people. Jews were attacked and murdered in pogroms throughout Europe and the Middle East, and heavily discriminated against in the United States. For those of us who grew up in 1970s America, anti-Semitism was a fact of life. But of course, nothing compared to what came before. I had to endure ostracism in my 6-week stint in an Oklahoma elementary school during the Christmas period. Since my classmates were aghast that non-Christians existed, restriction of Jews from my town's golf club, nobody played golf anyway, and exposure to dumb jokes about pennies thrown on the ground to attract Jews. My father, raised in the 1930s, was chased and beaten in his neighborhood for being a quote-unquote Christ killer. In the 1920s, he had witnessed his own father insulted by anti-Semites. Of course, my mother, raised in Lithuania, experienced far worse horrors. Her mother took in local lodgers and provided them lunch, the same people who, after her family left for America, would collaborate with the Nazis and march all of the remaining village Jews to a ditch, shoot them, and leave some buried alive and dying in agony, with no one brave enough to help them. If this shocks you, please don't listen further, since what I describe next is even more horrific. Hitler was fascinated by eugenics and set out to take the scientists at their word and extinguish every drop of Jewish blood. He had a hierarchy of racial superiority. At the top, blonde, blue-eyed, white-skinned, oval-faced, tall Germans. If you were blonde and blue-eyed but had a round face, you were slightly inferior, and so on. Those at the top were encouraged to reproduce as often as possible and to produce quote-unquote genetically superior Hitler Youth. Black people were classified as the bottom of the human hierarchy, fit only to be slaves of the superior Aryans. Jews, however, had their own separate classification, outside the human hierarchy, because they were considered subhuman vermin who needed to be exterminated. Not because Jews were attacking Germans, because quite the opposite. Jews made every effort to blend in and be model citizens. And not because Germans wanted these Jews' possessions or their wealth, although they stole all of it, but just because they were Jews. Jews, along with other undesirables, were sent to concentration camps and immediately murdered, or if they seemed healthy enough, slowly worked and starved to death. They were tortured with horrible medical experiments, such as being operated on without anesthesia, blinded by dyes injected into their eyes, paralyzed by spinal cord resections. It was, later, a big scientific controversy whether to use hypothermia data that had been collected by German scientists, since it had been obtained by pouring freezing water over Jews to see how long it took them to die. Experimental lab animals were treated more humanely. Because Jews were considered animals, their skin was made into leather that German SS commanders gave to each other as gifts, such as lampshades and pocket knife holders. Skin with interesting tattoos was preserved as leather. German children were taught the pseudoscience of their own superiority and that killing Jews was a good, moral act. They were taught with propaganda lectures, children's books, and board games depicting Jews as evil. They were taught that exterminating Jews was a wonderful gift to society. A horrible anti-Semitic children's book, distributed to schools throughout Nazi Germany, is available for all to see in the Internet Archive, translated into English in July of 2024, with one glowing review and 37 quote-unquote favorites. Some of the stories are so ridiculously and bizarrely anti-Semitic that they would be almost laughable if one didn't know they were used to indoctrinate German children to support Jewish murder. Stories about Jewish devils trying to lure innocent German children away with candy, Jewish doctors trying to defile pure German maidens, Jewish students participating in supposed Talmud lessons on how to avoid work and lie and cheat Goyim. The most interesting aspect is that I have seen the same concepts and articles from the Arabic version of Al Jazeera and in anti-Semitic Arabic children's programs. It's as if the anti-Israel crowd got all their information about Jews from reading The Poisonous Mushroom, from a chapter purportedly to be about a 13-year-old Jewish boy answering questions about the Talmud to his rabbi. Quote, "The Gentiles are created to serve the Jews. They must plow, sow, weed, dig, reap, bundle, sort, and grind. The Jews are created to find everything ready. We may lie and cheat Gentiles. In the Talmud it says, it is permitted for Jews to cheat Gentiles. All lies are good." And from Al Jazeera on June 30th, 2017, quote, "It is hidden from those who read Jews' religious books that there are clear and explicit texts that urge declaring and waging wars against the infidels, non-Jews, killing them, burning them, betraying them, and breaking covenants with them. Only the Jews deserve to live, and the rest of humanity is their slaves." End quote. Can you tell which quote came from the Poisonous Mushroom and which came from a Palestinian children's show? And yet so many people are proclaiming that descendants of Holocaust victims and survivors are creating a Holocaust against Gazans. Israelis do not want to exterminate Arabs. 20% of Israel is Arab, of the same genetics as Gazan Palestinians, who share some of the same genes as Jews. The vast, vast majority of Jews want to live in peace with Arabs. However, not with Arabs who are trying to kill them. They will not allow the Holocaust to happen again. Hamas's goal is to exterminate Jews. This stems from the same propaganda that was spread by the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who met with Hitler in 1941 to plan the murder of the Jews in British-era Palestine. The same lies that Nazis spread about Jews were spread to Palestinian Arabs and are still spreading today. Palestinian children are fed the same propaganda as the German children of World War II. Jews are evil. Jews are a scourge on humanity. Jews must be destroyed. Palestinian children are given anti-Semitic toys and anti-Semitic books. Israelis, on the whole, do not teach their children to eradicate Palestinians. They teach pride in their Jewish heritage, pride in Israel, and the hope that there will be peace. So, the actual irony of the Gaza war is that it was sparked on October 7th by Palestinians in Gaza who have been fed Nazi propaganda, a continuation of the same anti-Semitism that resurfaces periodically. The real poisonous mushroom is anti-Semitism, and it has cropped up once again.